Hey guys, how's it going? Kermody here. Welcome to part 3 of our beginner Ableton course. In this video, we're going to be covering recording live instruments, clip properties, warping, envelopes, automation, and quantizing. I'm sure a lot of that sounds like jargon that you may not understand, but let me assure you, it's really, really important. If you haven't already watched videos 1 and 2 of this series, make sure to go back and do that. And if you haven't already grabbed our Ableton starter sample pack, make sure to head down to the description of this video where you can grab it. It's all the professional sounding samples you will need to start writing great music. Now we've got a lot to cover in this video, so without further ado, let's get going. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up recording a live instrument. The first step, and this is going back to the first video, is going to be setting up our input in our preferences. So I'm going to press Command comma here to jump to our preferences, and we're going to go to the audio tab here, and we're going to jump to the audio input device. Here you can select the sound card you are using that you will plug your external instrument into. It's up to you to figure out how to set up that sound card and that instrument, but from there you can select this device. In this case, I am using Native Instruments Complete Audio 6, and I have that selected. With that selected, I can close this and I can create a new audio track now, and we will call this our live instrument. With that done, now we're going to the first drop-down menu here, and again, all this should be familiar to you because we did cover this, and you're going to select the external input, and with the external input properly selected under your preferences, you're then going to select the second drop-down menu where you can select the input on that sound card. So for example, my sound card, I have 2 optional inputs right now, and my microphone here is plugged into the first. Then what you're going to want to do is set your monitoring to either in or auto. Auto means you will hear the incoming signal except for when you are playing audio clips on the same audio track. In means you will always be hearing the incoming signal. Now sound is going to be going into your channel, like my voice channel here on the left, and now we can start recording. The first thing you're going to need to do to be able to record, and again something we've covered before, is we're going to arm the track. With the track arm, you'll notice that the stop buttons turned into record buttons, and now we have a few different options to record. The first is we can record a clip into this view here, and all you have to do is head up to a clip slot and hit the record button. It will give us the count in, and then this will start recording. And this will start recording. And this will start recording. Perfect, so now we've recorded a clip into session view. Jumping over to arrangement view here, things are a little differently. You don't have the option to record individual clips, but what you can do is you can hit the master record button to count in, and then the audio will record to your timeline. And then the audio will record to your timeline. And that's it. It's literally that simple. Ableton's super easy to set up and start recording. And now you can start inputting your voice and other instruments. On to part 2 of our video, and that's going to be clip properties. I'm going to drag in a clip here so I can go over the clip properties. So we have our beat here. And we're going to be going over everything we haven't gone through inside of clips, which is the window over here on the left. Starting from the left here, this is where you can deactivate the clip. Hitting this will just turn it off so it doesn't play when you hit the play button. Below it is the clip name. You can also rename the clip here. And below that is the clip's color. Moving on, we have the clip's time signature. Now clips actually can have their own time signature separate from the master time signature of your song. This could be really cool and useful for some interesting polyrhythmic ideas. Next up are grooves, and grooves are something we haven't actually touched upon, and I will briefly touch upon the basics of them now. In clips, what you can do is you can apply groove to things, and what grooves do is they add some lifelike, human-like swing or off timings to a sound to make it feel a bit more organic. To apply this to a clip, you can hit this hot swap button here. This hot swap button will bring you to your library's grooves where you can select one. Going through, you can hear and preview how that swing feels. So if I select this one here, it will be active right now, but it won't be applied, so our audio doesn't look any different at this point. However, when I commit it, You'll notice a bunch of warp markers were put into the clip and things were actually nudged a little off time. For example, if we zoom into the snare here, you'll see that it's no longer rock solid. It was actually moved forward. So you could actually apply feel to your clips with groove. Now, going into the whole groove pool and detail about making your own grooves is something for a later time, but do know this can be really useful for taking the robotic, almost too perfect sounds of electronic music and giving them more feel. So try experimenting with grooves. This can be a lot of fun. Up here you have the title of the original clip, and if you click it, it will actually locate it in your browser. That can be a really cool shortcut. Below you have some more information on the audio clip, such as the sample rate and the bit depth, something we haven't gone into yet, but useful for future situations as a producer. This save button here is quite useful, and what it will do is it will actually save any changes we make to our audio clip to the original audio clip in your browser. So when you drag it in, it will actually bring it in with that difference in audio. So let's say, for example, I pitch this clip up an octave and I hit save. Now when I drag this clip in again into a new track, you'll see it has that octave jump. I'm going to revert it back to how it was originally, hit save, and it will be the same. Next, which is very useful, is this reverse button. Now we've taken our clip and we've actually reversed the whole thing. You can already hear the creative possibilities with that. Next up is a high quality mode that Ableton can have, which is a little more extensive on your computer, but obviously will make things sound a little nicer. I recommend, if you have the computer processing to spare, that you have this on, because why not have higher quality sounds if possible. Next is this fade button. What this fade button does is it will actually apply tiny little volume fades to the beginning and end of your sound. The reason for this is some samples will have a bit of a click or a pop to them if they don't fully start at a zero crossing of that phase. A bit of a nerdy topic, but essentially what this will do is save you some clicks and popping. I personally recommend having this off because this can actually damage certain sounds such as drums where you need that initial thwack. So it's really up to you, but say for example you bring a sample in and it clicks in the very beginning and you don't know why, that fade button could save you from that. This RAM button here allows you to load the audio clip you're using into RAM on your computer, just to make things easier on your computer, because it's putting it into memory rather than reading it from the disk in real time. So this is just could ease things up on your computer a little bit if you need to. Next up, and a very useful one, is this transpose knob, and this will allow you to change the pitch of the sound in semitone. So this is our original beat. So this is really useful for pitching around samples. Below it, you have a detune, and this allows you to pitch around samples, but this allows you to do it in cents. Now, 100 cents makes up an entire semitone jump, so this is more of a minute change. This is a lot more subtle. To right of that, you have the individual clip volume, where you can actually change the clip volume for the individual clip, which is separate than the tracks volume that we've learned to change up here. We'll come back to warping in just a second. To the right, you have the start point of the clip. This is where the clip is going to start when you hit play. You can even go backward in time to give it a bit of a count in. And this is in bars, beats, and sixteenths. You'll notice the end arrow is grayed out here. That's because the loop function is on below it. But if loop were off, we can change the end arrow here, which will change when the clip ends. So you can make it really short, for example, and it'll end really quickly. Really useful thing to know. Next up is this loop button. Having this on will allow your loop to play again once it reaches the end of the loop brackets. And again, the loop brackets are the brackets here that are above the start and end arrows. So we can tighten up this loop. And it will loop that over and over. And similar to the start and end arrow positions, you have the loop length and loop start positions down here as well. Let's quickly take a look at a MIDI clip before we jump back, just so I can show you some of the clip properties for MIDI clips. So MIDI clips have a lot of the same things, all these start and end and loop brackets here, but it has a few little differences as well. The first is it will tell you the range of the MIDI notes, and what's actually really useful is you can actually scroll in semitones here. And the reason I actually like this more than highlighting and clicking and dragging is it'll actually tell you how many semitones you've moved. So if you want to go up an octave, you can actually just go up 12 right here, while sometimes clicking and dragging you might get lost as to what the bottom note was and where you're trying to go. So this is actually a really useful way of transposing. Next, you have a half tempo and double the tempo of your track, and this will allow you to stretch or shorten the desired MIDI. You have the same reverse button here, but this will actually reverse the MIDI pattern, which is really fun and creative. And you have an invert button, which will invert the bottom MIDI to the top and the top MIDI to the bottom. Next is a really cool one is the legato button, and what legato does is it will take any notes that aren't touching and it will extend it so it's touching the most nearest adjacent note. So for example, we have this big gap here, and if you hit legato, boom, it stretched it out so it's actually hitting that closest note. So that's a really useful one. Duplicate loop is one we went over in a previous tutorial, and this allows you to double the length of a loop. So that one's really useful as well. Now, program changes are a bit of an advanced topic, so we're not going to go over this. So now we can hop back over to our audio clip, where we're going to move on to the launch window before we go into warping. So this is the launch window here, and what this does is it actually determines how the clip is going to be triggered, as well as potential follow actions, which will tell the clip to trigger another clip. This is really useful for live performance. For example, say you want the intro clip of your song to actually trigger maybe the chorus at a certain point, so you don't have to. So let's go over the properties here. The first is the launch mode. So this is what every clip has by default, and this is what you're probably used to by now. And that's when you click the play button of a clip. It doesn't matter when you release your mouse, it's just going to wait to quantize it and play. So you can click down and you can let go, and it's just going to play normally. It's just going to toggle it on. See, that's different than the gate mode, however, because how this works is when you let go of your mouse, the clip will actually stop. So I'm going to be holding my mouse here, and I'm going to let go on bar 2. And when I let go, it actually stops. So this is really cool. Say, for example, you're performing live and you want to hold down a crash, but you don't want the crash symbol to ring out. You only want it to last as long as you're holding down a button. So that's what this gate mode would do. Next is the toggle mode here. And what this does is when you click the clip, it'll play. But if you click again, it will stop it, which is different than trigger mode, because if you clicked it again, it would actually play again from the beginning. This time it will start. And when I click it again, it will stop. So that one's a useful one as well. And lastly, you have the repeat. Now the repeat is really cool because what it will do is based off the quantize, it will trigger this over and over and over. So we're going to jump up to the quantize at the beginning of our screen, at the top of our screen here. We're going to set it to something really quick, like an 8th note. And watch what happens when I hold down this note. It's going to repeat it at an 8th note. And then when I release, it continues to play. Now this could be really useful. Let's say, for example, you wanted to finger drum live, but you're not very rhythmic and you're not very accurate. Well, what you could do is you could have the same hi-hat stacked on top of each other in different clips, but each one has a different quantize inside the internal clip, and that's actually our next feature. And that's this quantize here, and you can actually have a separate quantize per clip. So this one we're going to make a 30-second note. This one we're going to make a 16th note. This one we're going to make an 8th note, and this one we're going to make a quarter note. And I'm going to highlight them all so I can set them all to repeat. And now watch what happens. Obviously, you can see the creative potential of this for live performance, as well as maybe recording clips and humanizing your own build-up while writing a song. So now you know the different launch modes, and you know that clips can have their own individual quantize. Now you need to know about this legato button here. What this legato button does is instead of each time that you play the clip, it starts from the very beginning. What this legato button does is it will actually resume the track when you play it again from where the next clip was playing. So let's say, for example, I have a different clip below this clip here. if they were both in legato mode and I were playing this clip and it was reached bar 4 in its cycle when I triggered the top clip would then actually resume at its bar 4. I'll go into why this is really useful in a second. Next, you have a velocity for the individual track. You can actually set it so velocity actually affects the volume of a clip as you launch it. So this can make things more human if you have a controller and are performing live. But here comes the really cool part of the launch window, and that is the follow actions here. What the follow actions do is they allow you to tell a clip to trigger another clip based off certain circumstances. So the first is going to be time. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell this first clip to trigger a different clip after 2 16th notes. And again, this is in bars, beats, and 16ths. And anytime you see 3 digits of numerical values in Ableton, it's bars, beats, and 16ths. But then you need a follow action, and the follow action is saying after those 2 16ths which clip is selected. And here you can choose no action, which means it won't select a new clip. Stop, which means the original clip will stop. Play again, the original clip will start over. The previous clip above it will play. The next clip will be selected, which is the one we're going to select. Or the first, last, any, or other. So we're going to do next. So after 2 16ths, the next clip will trigger. Just so you have a full understanding, you can select a second follow action, and then below it you have a ratio. So what are the chances of the 2 follow actions happening? So right now, because it's a 1-to-0 ratio, it's guaranteed that this follow action will be selected. But if I had a different follow action selected and it was a 1-to-1 ratio, there would be a 50% chance that it could perform either of those follow actions. Undoing that though, we're going to just leave it with this one follow action, and after 2 16ths, you're going to see that the clip below it is actually going to be triggered. So I'm going to hit play, and 2 16ths. Maybe that was too quick. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set it to a bar, so it has a chance to play a bar before it does that again. So I'm going to play the top clip, and after 1 bar, it's automatically going to trigger the clip below it. And now if they were in legato mode, what they would do is they would actually be playing through at the same time. So after 1 bar, the second clip would actually jump to 1 bar in its cycle. There we go, resuming in bar 2. The reason this is so powerful is this. I'm going to grab a bunch of percussion loops real quickly, holding shift and highlighting them to drag in a ton, holding shift to highlight them and select all of them, and I'm going to change all their settings together. So they're all going to be in legato mode. They're all going to change after 2 16th notes, and any clip will be selected after 2 16th notes. Now when I hit play, they're going to jump between them randomly. This is going to be so cool. Mind-blowing. So now you can get Ableton to randomly select clips for you. The possibilities with this are endless. I know it's a lot to take in right now, but just wrap your head around the power of the launch window under the clip properties. Now we have to move on to the last part of our clip properties here, and that is warping, and that is actually the next part of our tutorial. So let's move on to warping. Next up, we're on to one of the most powerful features inside of Ableton, and that is Ableton's warping. Briefly touched upon it in a previous video, we can now go into full depth, and Ableton's warping is Ableton's ability to stretch and mangle audio. All of that is going to be controlled here in this window and by different warp markers we place in our sound. By default, a clip has a warp marker at the beginning of and end, and Ableton typically tries to warp things in time by default. Now you are going to need this warp button here to be on, otherwise the clip will play at its native speed. Now the segment BPM here is what Ableton guessed the original BPM was at, and this can be a really fun shortcut to actually input the original BPM or to do really cool stretching yourself by actually putting in incorrect values. Let's say, for example, though, I dragged a clip in here and it was totally out of time, and I knew the clip was originally at 82.5 BPM. I can just type that in and it would actually put it into time. So that's really useful. Below is a feature we saw under the MIDI clip properties, and that is the double the length of time. So you can immediately double the length of a clip. Or you can make it twice as fast. Now, what really makes Ableton so powerful, though, is the ability to hover your mouse above any point of a clip to input a warp marker, and that warp marker can then be dragged around. So again, I kind of explained this before. Imagine your sound is an elastic, and by default it has 2 nails at either end of the elastic. But then you can put a new nail anywhere in the sound, and you can stretch it somewhere and then let go and place that nail there, and then it is stuck and stretched. This is how you're going to be able to, for example, get acapellas into time that weren't originally in time, or drum loops that weren't originally at the original tempo of this song. And I'll actually show you how to do that right now. So say, for example, my master BPM is 9250 right now, and I bring in a clip at 92 BPM. I'm going to turn warp mode off here, so when I turn it on, it's totally out of time. And you'll see here when I press play on this clip with a metronome, way out of time. So what we can do is we can warp this sample into time. This sample is really easy, especially because it's got 4 obvious transients, and we can click and to input some warp markers, and we can just start to drag things around and put it into time. Super duper easy. And I could go all the way through this clip and warp it into time. Moving back to our clip here, if at any point you want to delete a warp marker, it is as simple as double clicking it as well. Next up, I want to tell you about the different warp modes inside of Ableton, because clearly Ableton has to perform some sort of magic to be able to stretch sounds like this, and each different mode, the different way it's stretching it, is going to have different results. So I'm actually going to stretch this sample to be twice as long so you can really hear exactly what each warp mode is doing. Now, by default, my Ableton is set to beats mode, so when I drag the clip in here, it's in beats mode warping here, and you'll see under the drop-down menu you have a few other options. I will fully explain beats mode first. Now, beats mode gets its name because it is ideal for beats, because what it does is it picks up on transient information and plays it back in a certain way. And transient information is a really loud point in sound. And if you see how these little gray lines here above the loudest points of these drums, that was Ableton trying to read the transients, and it's actually going to warp the sound based off those transients, and it's going to play it back and preserve, based off this preserve button here, the transient as if it were playing the original speed in certain ways. So for example, the transient function here, what it will do is it will pick up on these transients from the original audio, and it will play it back in a certain way until it hits the next transient from the original audio, and it will play that one back from the original sample until it hits the next one, play that one back until it hits the next one, and play that one back. So if you listen, this kick drum will almost repeat over and over and over till this snare drum repeats over and over and over, till this kick drum repeats over and over and over, because it had to mangle it. Now you'll hear it has this swooshing sound to it right now, and the reason for this is because it's in forward and back mode, which you can see by this forward arrow and this back arrow. What this does is it picks up on the original transient and it plays the original sample back at the original speed till it's fully done. Then it plays it backward until it reaches the original sample. So it's going to take that kick drum, it's going to play it forward at the original speed, but then it ran out of audio to play. So to be able to stretch out that time, it's going to start playing it backward, and it's going to keep doing that until the next one happens. So if I stretch this way out, you'll really hear it. Watch how this kick drum plays forward and back and forward and back and forward and back until the next snare drum. Great, so now that you have an understanding of that, I can tell you the different modes of playing it back. The other is forward mode, so instead of it playing forward and then reversing, it will just play that sample over and over and over again. So if I press play here, you'll hear it play that kick drum over and over and over again till the next snare. And the last one is play once mode. And what this will actually do is it will play the original sample at the speed it was originally intended, and then it will wait until the next transient, and it will do that. So watch what happens. It'll play the kick and just stop until it gets the next transient information and stop, and it'll do that again. So knowing these different warp modes is going to be really important. Next is you have a transient envelope here, and what this will do is instead of playing it over and over and over at the exact same speed, it will start to turn it down. So if I tighten it up all the way to 0 to really exaggerate that, it'll play the original transient and then it'll quickly go down in volume and it'll stop. If I make it less exaggerated, you'll hear that. So each repeat starts to fade in volume. So that was transient mode, and what transient mode did is it just picked up the transients and replayed those. But you can actually just give it rhythmic values, so it'll just play the original sample every 16th note. It'll play it forward and back. Or you could do something looser like a bar. So you really have to use your ears, because obviously this waveform is not going to represent how it's actually stretching the audio. Now the reason Beats mode got its name and that it's good for beats is because it does preserve the original sample. Say for example you have it in transient mode, forward facing, it is going to play the original sample the way it was intended, which is pretty clean. Some warp modes you'll notice will be a bit grainy sounding, so that's why this one can be very useful for beats. Especially with this tight envelope mode, you can really get creative and start to yield some cool results. Let's move on to the next warp mode. Moving on, the next warp mode is tones mode. How's tones mode work is it works by repeating little grains of audio, and you can have really tight ones so it's a little less obvious to really big ones where it sounds like it's kind of looping the grain over and over and over again. So I'll show you our stretched audio with a tight grain here. And here it is with a looser grain. Now with a dramatically stretched piece of audio like this, it's a little more obvious, but let's do something a little more subtle. I'm just going to stretch things a little tiny bit so it's not quite as obvious here. And then I'm going to show the different grain sizes. So on beats, it's a little more obvious and it may not be as transparent, it may not be as useful, but on things for leads and things with clear pitches, actually, this can be quite useful. And I find it sounds good on things without much of a transient, more slow evolving sounds. Next up is texture mode, and texture mode sounds quite similar, and you have the similar grain size option, except this one, the grain can get a lot tighter. And it's also equipped with a flux option, and the flux option will add some randomness into the grain, and the larger the flux, the larger the grain can jump in value. And this can just make things a little more organic and less robotic. But listen what happens when you have a really tight grain size. It's so tight that it actually almost adds a pitch to the sound. Watch what happens when I make it a little looser. And so this flux option below will stop it from staying this sort of one obviously warped style. And we'll randomize it a bit. Cool. The next mode is repitch, and the repitch is technically the cleanest warp mode because how repitch works is it actually works a lot like a record player, for example. On a record player, if you were to slow the record player down, the sound would go lower in pitch, but you haven't actually done any sort of changes or processing to the audio. You're just playing it slower and the pitch is going down, or say you were to tighten it, the pitch would go up because it's playing faster. So this is the most realistic. So in this case here, it'll go way down in pitch. But here you get no weird grainy artifacts or things that the other warp modes can do. But again, the only problem with this is it's a little unpredictable because it'll change the pitch of your sound. So it's up to you whether you want to use this. I find repitch is really good for really minute changes. So let's say, for example, our sound was just slightly off and you want to move it just a little bit. This repitch mode will be very discreet and hard to notice. And again, the least destructive warp mode. Next up is Complex and Complex Pro. And these two warp modes use more advanced algorithms inside of Ableton. So to the regular ear, these are probably the most transparent. Now they can cause weird phase issues. If you guys don't know what phase is, that's something you'll probably be learning about further down the road. But probably right now, I'd recommend this one because it is very transparent. To the regular ear, this is probably the cleanest way of stretching audio. So experiment with Complex and Complex Pro. So there we go. Now you guys know the different warp modes and maybe a few situations to apply them. It's really about testing them out, just getting used to the different characters and tones of them. You'll realize over time what warp modes are more appropriate for what situations. And do really take advantage of these because the ability to warp things and receive these really cool artifacts is just one amazing thing about Ableton. So really play around with warp modes. Now, one last thing I want to leave you with is you can actually warp MIDI as well. I'm going to quickly grab some MIDI here, and I'm going to highlight a bunch of MIDI, and you'll see some warp markers actually appeared above, and you can actually stretch and mangle the MIDI. So that's actually really cool to know as well. So that about covers it for warping. Let's move on to automation and envelopes. So often in writing music, you're going to want a changing parameter, a changing value to become part of the music. And that's what automation really is. Let's say, for example, we have our sound here. And we want that movement to occur without us having to manually change that value all the time. Well, that's what automation is inside of Ableton. Now you can have automation in two different places. You can have automation inside the individual clip, or you can have automation on the arrangement view here. And you're going to want that final set of automation here for when you export your song. So first I'm going to show you how to put it into a clip because we were just talking about clip properties, and I actually left out this last window here, which is the envelope box, which is how you can automate things over time. So in this envelope box, when you click it, you're going to notice that the MIDI grays out, or in audio, the same case, the audio is going to gray out, and this little red dotted line is going to appear. Now this little red dotted line is a way for you to control a parameter over time depending on the parameter, and most parameters will show up as something you can automate. So what you have to do is you have to find the thing you want to automate here in the drop-down menus. You have the basic mixer options such as track volume and panning, which you can automate, but you can also go into the individual parts of the instrument and instrument rack. So effects, you can automate the things within the effects or the overall group. And I'm going to go to the group, and you'll notice the filter cutoff is here because that's actually the last thing we played with. When you click in place with something, that's actually going to be what shows up. So for example, we can actually automate this volume. If I click this volume knob, when I go back to the clip, the volume is going to be the thing I can automate now. So what you have to do is if you click a point, it will create an automation dot. Now an automation dot allows you to move that dot and create some sort of movement. So undoing that, I'm going to do a very linear one here. I'm going to do a very basic dot here, and I'm going to click another dot at the end, and we're going to have a ramp from the lowest value to the highest value over the course of the entire clip. Now let's take a look at the main volume here. So there we go. Over the course of the clip, it's actually started automating that. And again, this is applicable to almost any parameter inside of Ableton. As long as it's on the device, you can change it over time. So let's actually change this filter cutoff over the course of this entire thing. So I clicked the filter cutoff. It appeared in the drop-down menus as one I can change. I clicked to create some automation points. And now over the course of this entire MIDI clip, we're going to automate that filter cutoff. So that's all cool, but now I actually want to record this into the arrangement view. So with our clip armed down here and the automation arm button here, as long as we hit record and we change this parameter, it's actually going to record this into our arrangement. And there we go, we can actually see it here. If we hit the back to arrangement button, this is now officially on our timeline. So now we have so many more options because our sounds can evolve over time. They're not just this one stagnant sound you dragged in. You can manipulate and evolve anything. And again, this isn't just limited to macros. If you go inside of any device, it is quite likely that if you are to click it, you can actually automate it over time. If you just click it, it'll show up as an option to automate. So everything now has this option to evolve and become something new over time. So your sound can be so much more than just this one stagnant thing. Do note that automation will record over. So if I hit record here, the automation is actually going to record over that automation. And deleting automation is done in two different ways. The first is you can double click any point, but if you recorded it, you see there's going to be a ton of points. So what you can do is if you actually click one desired point and hold shift and click and drag, you'll start to overwrite all those points. So that's a really cool way of quickly deleting automation that you do not want. Now you don't have to record it in. Again, you can also draw it in, and you can even use the pencil tool to draw it in and it will snap to your grid. So you can actually rhythmically automate things as well. You're not just limited to recording or drawing ramps. You now have these options here. Now, a cool new feature with Ableton 9 is that you can also, by holding Alt, actually curve these envelopes as well. So you don't have to just do these square or these jankety recorded ones. You can now do these really clean curved lines as well, which makes these a little more advanced and a little more interesting. Now the back to arrangement button also applies for automation, not just clips as we learned about earlier. So let's say, for example, I'm just testing out an idea here and I start moving this filter cutoff. It'll let me test out that idea, but it won't delete the original unless I had hit record, so we can just hit the back to arrangement button to get back to our original automation. Now, if ever you're lost too and you automated quite a bit of information, what you can do is you can actually right click any parameter that was automated, and you can show the automation in new lane. So now you can actually see all these automations on top of each other, and you can copy and paste them around, which is really useful as well. Not only that though, is you can actually lock the automation, so you can copy clips around without copying the automation, because sometimes you don't want to copy something and have all that automation go with you. So you can press this automation lock button up here so you can move clips around and all the automation will stay where it was. So do know where that button is, because that's really useful as well. Really experiment with this, because again, you can automate anything. You can even automate the master tempo of your track. Anything you can think of in Ableton, you can probably automate it. You can automate turning things on and off. You can automate panning. You can obviously automate sending things to sends. So it's really up to you to test all of this out. You have all the tools you need now to start mangling all the ideas that we were previously bringing in from previous tutorials. So there we go, everyone. That was part 3 of our beginner Ableton course here at Cymatics. I hope you got a lot out of this video. I know it's a lot to take in, but getting through this course, you're going to know so much about Ableton. You're going to be able to write great music. Now again, if you haven't already grabbed our beginner Ableton sample pack, make sure to head to the description of this video where you can grab it for free. Now make sure to check out video 4, where I'm going to go in depth into some of the instruments and effects in Ableton, so you can really have a full, rich understanding of how to use them. So again, thanks guys. My name's Cymatics, we're Cymatics, and I'll be back soon with another video. Peace.